We don't have music from. Wonderful performance, Rudy and Zhang. That was really exciting and virtuosic and had lots of terrific things. Can everybody hear me okay? Okay, it's odd because I see, yes, Rudy, yeah, now I see you looking at me. It's okay. You can look whatever direction you need to look. It's just fine. Um, Super exciting piece. This Ferrari stuff is really wild. I'm going to talk later about another poem that he sets. I hope you'll have a look at, so you have a little repertoire of Ferrari under your belt, because it would be a great piece for you. Um, I think there are some things, we're going to talk about this later in the lecture, and I know you can't stay for it, but I hope you'll listen to it later, Rudy, because I think it'll help shed some light on the interpretation of this piece. Probably the thing that strikes us right away about this piece is it's on the ground bass called the chacona. And the chacona is not just just one of many, many ground basses, but it carries with it a certain sort of connotation. The chacona started out in Spain, and it was used for sort of lascivious and naughty texts. So when we see the chacona, we know that there's probably something a little suggestive, playful. It's about love, but it's about all kinds of love. It's probably a sassy kind of text, even if it doesn't look like it on the surface. And I think that we certainly got some of a sense of that from your performance. But my feeling was that to highlight that even more, I'd love to see you step back one tick in not just so much tempo as the way that it presses forward. I feel like it's technique forward right now, and I would like it to be sprezzatura forward. And sprezzatura was something they prized in the 17th and 18th century. It was a way of conducting yourself that you made everything look easy. You had such control, such immense ability that you made everything look like a cakewalk. So right now I feel like you're tilted forward into this chacona. It's really high pressure, but I'd love to hear it be a little bit more sassy, a little bit. So it just has a little bit of ease in it. And then from that bass tempo, you could relax ever so slightly, or you could sort of have that feeling of tilting forward. I call this being on the front side of the beat or being on the back side of the beat. So if you were to measure it with a metronome, you'd be in between clicks. But in feeling, you would have one of ferociousness, or you might have one of languidity. For instance, when you're talking about Io Moro, you're talking about Pianti, things like that, where you want to relax a little bit more. I wouldn't mind just trying a little bit of that and seeing what you think about that, even in just the opening stanza. Yeah, and when you get to the line where you have il morire per amore è una pazzia, we could really hear that contrast right there. You have that nice static line of all those D's in a row, il morire per amore, to die for love is craziness, and then you can sharpen it up again. But if that allows you to be a little bit more legato, a little bit more gooey, at that slightly more relaxed tempo, you want to give that a try? I think you'd find it fun. Oh, you know what? I'm so sorry. Before you start, I just realized it's hard. I'm sorry, Rudy. It's very hard. It feels like at this distance, I won't be able to stop you midway to say another thing. So let me give you a couple of other ideas while we're there. When you get to this wonderful, una bella donna è vezzosa, but also cruda, right? And when you get the word cruda, you get this wonderful series of sort of suspensions that create dissonance against the bass line. One thing we can do with our vocal color when we are dealing with dissonance is to maximize the dissonance by sort of thinking of a leaner sound. I know a lot of people will start talking about straight tone or, non-vibrato, and I don't want anybody ever to feel like they're in a straitjacket, that they're stressing their voice in any way. But if you think of a core sound, a lean sound, where your vibrato is not taking us too far into the consonant notes, but keeping you absolutely focused like a laser beam on the dissonant notes, you'll get more mileage out of that figure. You'll just get more out of what the composer has given you to work with. And it's a wonderful, wonderful contrast to those of the delightful parts of this lady, and really leaning into what's not so delightful about her. Um, yeah, that was my other big idea. So let's try that with those two things in the beginning. So try a tempo that's a little bit more relaxed, a little bit more sassy. Now, I will stop you. Can I stop you? I'm sorry. I'm going to talk now to our harpsichordist. And what happens in a chacona often is that the rhythm condenses itself. We get bum 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 bum, and we tend to jump into that second time. I'd like you to feel like it's almost late. Bum 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 ba dum da dee ba ba da ba dum da. Not with the accent so much, but just placing it, and make sure that you're not contracting that rhythm at all, because that's what helps to contribute toward this very high pressure forward movement. Okay. Yeah, that's great, Rudy. I would say I'll stop you here. That's terrific. It's already better. I love that sort of lean sound that you're getting. Now, the other thing that you can do on those chromatics is you don't need to be so surgically clean. You can sing, you can slide a little bit in between pitches. There's even an example of somebody trying to write this out. We believe there's a piece by Jacopo Peri that shows double sharps and double flats, which they did not use in this period. And a lot of scholars think that that was a way of trying to notate, slide in between your chromatics. One of my colleagues likes to say, insert the knife, twist the knife. So we get karoo, that inserts the knife, and then twisting the knife is as we go into the chromatics. Does that sound like fun?
It does.
Yeah. Okay. Good. And Rudy, I'm also going to ask you to lighten up a little bit on your little ornamental figures, like yabba-dabba-doo, yabba-dabba-doo. So you take your whole voice. It's a little harder to sing, and it's a little harder for us to hear. So if you can think a little bit about Camello Sassi, just a little bit lighter. Even I don't know whether you've worked with, are you working with Jeffrey? And maybe have you worked on some glottal articulation? That would be a good place to employ that if you've experienced that before. If not, we can talk about it someday in the future. But let's give that one more try. And now let's smear those chromatics, make them a little more agonizing. Even one tick slower. Would you be willing? Just one tick slower. Good. I feel like you barely have time to breathe in those rests. I'd love to see you have that sprezzatura. Easy. Yeah, good, good. I love the chromatics. That was really fun. That's really fun. And I know you've got this in your body at that other tempo, and it's hard to pull back. But I can already hear that when you finish your phrase, it has more poise. We really want to feel like when we get to a place where we need to breathe, that the the tempo is not causing us to be un, oops, ungracious. We want to have a soft landing. give even final syllables their full due, their full nice integrity, and then breathe comfortably and go on, which isn't to say it should be super slow by any means, but this already gives you more of those options, which is terrific. Now, one other thing I'm noticing in this that I haven't heard yet are these little T's indicating trills of some sort. And in this period, for everybody's understanding, the T can mean both a trillo, which you have written out in this piece, right, at the end of one of your strophes, I forget which one, and then sometimes it can mean a trill. And then to further complicate matters, it can mean an above note trill, in other words, the appoggiatura comes from above, or it can mean a main note trill, depending on what the harmonic context is. And Ferrari, if I'm not mistaken, yes, he's late enough that he probably could be using these above and main note trills rather than trilli in this verse, for instance, on these figures at the end. So the il morir per amor, pazzia, pazzia. So you can do a main note trill on that one, and you can do a main note trill at the end of your second line, where you've got a T written above the B, the dotted B. And I might not be hearing it simply because it might be obscured a little bit by your vibrato. This is another place where we can consciously use a more lean sound so that we don't obscure those trills. We go into them with a slightly plainer sound in our voice, and then we hear the alternation as an ornament rather than as vibrato. You could put a trillo on your very fast on the word pazzia, the very last time you say it. In fact, I think that would be kind of funny. We have to think about a trillo, which is already kind of an old-fashioned ornament by this time, but it can be, on the right word, it could be very funny. So, un pazzia. It sounds a little bit like a laugh. It's good for the word crazy, would be great. I don't know if I would use it on the word amore, you know, or morire, certainly not, because it would have the wrong effect. But that's a nice thing to know about these ornaments. I'm checking time. When I have a little bit more time with Rudy, right? I can go on, or Jeffrey, or anybody who wants to nod yes. Yeah, we can go on. Great, great. Let's take a look. I'd like to skip. I mean, you could apply what we just talked about to these other verses of the Passacaglia. I would encourage you to, as you did, add the sort of vamping, those sort of several times through the Passacaglia in between verses, and maybe think about how each one starts and ends so that we have a little change in the tone. In other words, the harpsichord, the continuo, whatever it is, can kind of set the tone for the next bit of text. If you think of it, you end the first strophe and you're talking about dying for love is crazy. Everybody should just forget about this nonsense. The next verse is a little bit philosophical, right? You could be a little bit drier. You could be a little bit more, let me explain to you why this is true. One shouldn't think that, and then you get very professorial, right? So it's maybe not so passionate, so full chords and that kind of thing. You could play a little bit more dryly, fewer notes, fewer big chords, to let him sort of give his little argument there. And again, in a few minutes, we're going to talk about this kind of rhetorical structure that we find in these strophic songs. However, the Vi volpianti a diluvi is one where we're going to start to get very emotional and talk about floods of tears and the Vesuvius, the explode, you know, the volcano of an amorous heart, and we're going to get very passionate. The harpsichord can absolutely set that up for you, which is really great. And then you can change your color accordingly in that verse. Now, if we go to the recitative, we'll assume you've done all that beautifully. I thought you did a great job of respecting the written rhythms, and thank you so much for that. I think sometimes we take the advice of the 17th century composers that the music should be natural for the text, that we should make it sound like speech, and then we end up making it sound like our speech. But these guys wrote down very specifically how they wanted the poetry to be recited and wrote that down in musical notation. So kudos to you for respecting that, because it's, again, making the best use of the material on the page, which is great. we get a wonderful, this riff at the end, which is very funny. That's actually painting the word fuggire, even though it's on the verb. The non si può, sorry, the auxiliary. It's very, very, very funny. And I think, is that the spot I was thinking? Yes, when you finish that with that great written out trillo and that wonderful little ornament on it, I would propose to you that that bottom G is then dovetailed into the next chacona section. You know what I mean? So it goes and goes straight on rather than stopping and starting again. It's a really common thing that we get a little recit inserted into these ground bass pieces, and they are usually just before some kind of concluding sentiment, and that helps to connect your ideas there if you just go straight on. Could we try this quinta parte now with this little recitative? And I would encourage you to again think about a drier and leaner sound sometime when you're singing this, when it's very static, like most of the lines are in this one, unless you're doing some big virtuosic riff. A little bit more parlando, and I just mean that in terms of your vocal color. Your rhythm's great, your inflection is good, but make sure that we really understand. So, credete al costui che per prova può dir. So we really get a lecturing feeling from you. So now I've told you all this stuff. You should believe me. I'm experienced. I know. I was there. If you want to mess things up for yourself, you go ahead. It has to be kind of pedantic in a way, or parental. You could think of it any number of ways, but it's definitely lecturing. So see if you can give us a little bit more of that sense by giving yourself a little bit of elbow room in between important phrases, and just make your delivery a little bit more deliberate, if you will. Do you want to give that a go? Great. Okay, let's just stop there for a moment, Rudy, and let me give you a couple of more suggestions of things to try. So, pretty good. When the composer writes io vidi and io fui, which one do you think he thinks is more important?
I was there.
Yeah. Not only did I see it, I did it. I've experienced it. So let's create a little bit of contrast there between those two. So we have credete alla costui che per prova può dir io vidi, io fui, more deliberate. And then just take a moment. You just made your point. Now you're going to go on to the next thing. The next thing is, okay, you don't believe me? You don't want to believe me? Then fine. I don't care. Go ahead and screw things up for yourself, right? You're making each of these little statements, and it would be great if we just had elbow room between phrases, so we really understand that you're now about to make another statement or another argument. I love this line where it doesn't do a bit of good to warn, seguitate ad amare ad ogni modo che rompersi il collo. And if you could just let that sit for a minute, so we can laugh in a way, and then go on to the next one. And when you get to the line oderta o fondo, I would encourage you to try something that's quite a theatrical sound in that. Fondo instead of fondo. It sounds very robust, but we're meant to be seeing somebody who's just dashed their brains out on the rocks, right? Maybe you could give us a little bit more of a bleak, sort of dramatic vocal color to see what just happened to this poor guy who ran off a cliff for the love of a woman, right? I wouldn't mind trying that again from the top and just again a little bit more time at those praise places. Io vidi, io fui, um, and rompersi il collo, non accade, and so on, and have time to go on. Okay, just take a breath so you're not. What this gives us, Rudy, is the idea that you are thinking and speaking in tandem. You aren't reading a speech you wrote, right? You're actually trying to explain something to us. And when we try to explain and we keep thinking of better and better ways to explain it, we hesitate, we take a breath, we go, and you know what else? And another thing, right? So give us the time to kind of hear you think a little bit. There we go. Okay, I'm going to stop just to say that the sound is getting extremely distorted on my end. I don't know whether that's on whose side we have this issue, but it's getting really hard for me to hear. Um, are the admins there? Is there something that I should be doing or you should be doing to? Uh, Now I can, yes, thank you. I would love to try that again. I'm sorry, I lost the whole second half of it because it was just too crackly. But I did hear the beginning, so maybe I can make a couple of suggestions before you try it again. Um, I'm curious, and I do mean this, that I'm just curious about your the way you say seguitate ad amar. Are you trying to paint sort of a go ahead and love, kind of a sarcastic tone there? Yeah. Okay. Okay. Could you maybe exaggerate that a little bit? I didn't quite get it, and I think if you want, I think you could go a couple of ways with this phrase, but that's certainly there's nothing in the music that tells me no. I think my tendency, but it's probably just because I tend to be more sarcastic, because I probably going go ahead, do what you want. I might have been more kind of crappy old lady about it, but I think your idea will work fine. But I think you need to exaggerate it. Otherwise, we don't get that it's sarcastic. It just sounds like you want them. Oh, seguitate ad amar. You sound sympathetic, and I don't think you mean that. I think you mean right? Okay, so you could, again, you can use vocal color, you can use any number of things, but I think then when, after you say that, ad ogni modo chi rompersi il collo, go, fine, whatever, when it changes, then you have to sharpen it up again so that you don't keep sounding sarcastic, sympathetic, you know?
Right.
Yeah, so seguitate ad amar, ad ogni modo chi rompersi il collo, get a little bit more, you know, matter of fact about it. Okay, just to exaggerate a bit. But I liked the time that you took before that. It really helped me kind of absorb what you said, maybe laugh a little in my head or out loud, and then move on. Let's try that again. Yeah, and the next time we finish it up, let's try for the harpsichord to go straight on. Di fuggire, pa, 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 ram, pa, da, dim, pa, da, right? Good, good, Rudy. I really like all of that. I have one more further suggestion, which is that when you get to the moral of the story, which is those last two lines, as they always say, where it says, "For I've always heard the proverb," that's like, you know what they say, or my grandfather always said, or it's, you know you're getting to the moral of the story. We need to feel that that's coming on the end of your argument before that. So you're saying, non accade che scrivi oderta o fondo, che per proverbio, and go on. Not like it's stop and then a brand new idea. It's actually, it's connected a little bit more, which would be terrific. I'm really liking your fondo now. I think it's really, you found a really good sound there. It's wonderfully colorful and gives us the sense of falling into a pit, which is what we want. That's why he puts that low, I mean, I know it's not super low, but a low note there. Would it be okay to start at seguitate ad amar?
Yeah.
Great.
Non accada che scrivi, e per proverbio sentir sempre dire, al destinato non si può.
Yeah. All right, let's stop on this verse, Rudy. Let's try putting in those trills. Donna. So you just have to do a little flip. Donna. Yeah. And we get this Donna city. And remember to keep your totally cool tempo. Cool and sassy and swingy. Okay?
Okay.
All right. That was nice. That was really nice. Why don't we start just with a couple vamps of the, oh dear. Sorry, doorbells are going off. Go ahead. Let's try that. Um, let's see if there's anything else I can throw in here for you this last time through. Um, no, I'll stop you when we get there. Let's go ahead.
Okay. Donna, so che tu sei morta di miei. Non te scopio con voi, la vi vuoi, la vi vuoi. Sono voce contigo, voce contigo, sono, oh, guarda, buon amor, non mio, saria valor, valor, d'amor, d'amor,
Okay, we can talk about the ending in just a minute. I'm going to point out another piece of evidence that I think this is maybe on the fast. In fact, I just definitely think this is on the fast side. Is that you can't quite get the words in. You know, so que tu fais, so que tu sais, you know, it's so quick we can't quite get it. And I think if you just so que tu sais, da da da, so que tu sais is even a little bit, just a little on the back side of the beat, so that you're not chattering so fast we can't quite get it, and it's such a challenge for you. You don't get any chance to have fun, right? um, I think when we get to this wonderful stuff at the bottom of page whatever this is, where you're saying uh, un ballardo, sorry, a balordo, which is a word I don't know, but it's yadadun da da dun, yadadun da da da. This is making fun of him, right? So you can be kind of like na 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 na, a little bit more thumb on the nose, a little less serious vocalism there. I know I feel like all my advice to you is to stop singing so much, but you're a great singer. I mean, you're a wonderful singer, and you use your voice so well that you can afford now and then to step away a little bit and be a bit more the actor and a little less of the singer on a piece like this, where comedy is so difficult, you know. So you need to pick up all. I always tell people you got to use all the Crayolas in the set of however many, 60 or whatever it was. Probably nobody uses them anymore, and I'm using an outdated metaphor. But you get the idea. You want to have all the possible colors that you can bring to bear on this text to make it make sense, to help color it for us. Now, so we can talk about that when you do it next. Just try a little less serious, a little bit more gestural for those little nuggets. Now you're doing some fancy stuff at the end. I lose you a little bit on the score, and I think that's fine if you want to kind of rewrite and do your own things at the end. But what I would suggest is that you try your last bar without what a friend of mine used to call a ta-da. If the composer has just done, 10 bars of crazy passaggi, I don't think you need to add them on Dio. I would propose that you do that simply. Plus, it's kind of the ultimate insult in this piece. You're saying, you might think you're a god, Cupid, and the most mighty god of all of them. They were always fighting about who was the most powerful. But you're saying, I don't think so. You're not that. You're more of a booby than a god. And so it's really great if we hear that clearly and not with too much stuff on it. So I would suggest you give it a try a couple of times with the long D, and then un Dio, and then just make the Dio. It's a little bit chopped off for me to understand the word. So I think short is fine. That long, big square note doesn't mean hold it for 3 days, but I think it would be nice if we heard the word clearly with all the scorn that you are bringing to it, which is terrific. But maybe drop the ornament. It doesn't sound quite as scornful. You've just said, you've made the Dio sound more like the balordo. And I think we need them to sound really different, since that's what you're accusing him of. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Okay, why don't we try it from, if we have time, I'd love to go do this from, oh, like Sognun fosse comio or something like that, just to get the ending. And again, just relax this tempo, guys. Don't feel like you've got to, this is going to sound even faster when it doesn't sound pressed, believe it or not. Yaga daga 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 diga da, yum bum ba dee, yum bum ba da.
Son un fosse conmigo, fosse conmigo, Sonia, come non amor, non mio, Sonia, valor amor,
Yeah, try doing it one more time without slowing down. It can be in tempo. Ah, no, non Dio. You know, you don't have to put a big retard on it at all. I think you had the right idea on that the first time around. Um, can we move that, the breath that you were taking, second line from the bottom previous page, so that we hear, unless I'm wrong, let me just make sure I'm not making sense. No, saria un balordo, and you're going saria un balordo. In this music, it's no problem to breathe in the middle of a melisma. You just have to make a sensible musical shape, and you can always, it's always better, I believe, to breathe during a melisma than to breathe in a place that breaks up the syntax in an ungrammatical way. So I would say that if you sing son un fosco mio, io fosse com, saria un ballar, yes, saria un balor, lordo amor. You could breathe before or you could breathe somewhere in that long melisma. Sorry, I just made a mash of the singing because I don't sing this piece, but let's try it again from Sognun fosse and see if you can sort of relocate that breath so that we really get your sentence. And then we'll go all the way to the end and have a nice settled, poised, da lum bum bum bum.
son un fosse conmigo, Sonia, come non amor, non mio, Sonia, valor amor, non mio.
Yeah, I think that that's terrific. I think that really makes your point. It's fun, it's sassy at the end, but it's still really sophisticated, if you know what I mean. I mean, one of the things that they really like to think about in this period is that the noble way and the ignoble way. And believe it or not, this piece is noble in the sense that it's highly virtuosic. So you are doing everything not like a clown that's going to go splat on the stage necessarily, but like a nobleman singing this extremely witty piece to a bunch of his colleagues who really get the deal, get the style, and that gives you a little bit more elegance, I think, even though it's funny and it's sassy. If that makes sense. Sounds like I'm saying opposites, but I'm really not. Okay, nice. Well, I think we can just say bravo. What a great job! Unless you've got some questions about something that I didn't address, but I think it's fantastic.
I, I do not, I have not tackled music this early before.
Oh,
Yeah, so this has been kind of a wild ride for me.
well, fantastic. Because with such a high voice, you absolutely should be doing this repertoire, huh?
Well, yeah, so I have to think, to Dr. Chen for picking it out to me and thrusting it upon me, because it's helping everything else, all my high Baroque hand-on Bach stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But I had a lot of trouble really starting to organize this, and I was kind of wondering, how do you take a piece like this that literally, when I heard it, I thought, there's no way that this is ever going to come out of my body.
Right. Well, I'll tell you what, Rudy, that's exactly what I'm going to talk about after this break. And so I hope you'll get a chance to listen to the recording, because that's precisely what rhetorical analysis will give you, is a way to take a great big piece like this and break it into constituent parts and understand the architecture that the poet and the music and the composer were trying to give it, so that it becomes a really convincing argument. The argument in this case being, ladies, or lovers, listen to me. Don't believe in the folly of love. You'll only get hurt, right? That's the whole argument. And it's organized in a really clever way, like many long pieces in this period. So I'll be showing some examples of that in the talk. So I think you'll get the answers to your questions then.
Well, thank you so much. It was a pleasure singing for you. We enjoyed it very much.
Thanks, everybody. Bravo. Bravi.
So Ellen, if you want to say move forward and then to your lecture.
I'm so sorry. I just saw your text about stopping the screen share. You should have just yelled at me, but I will do that for the next group. I'm very sorry. I didn't realize that was obscuring everyone's vision, including mine.
No problem. So Ellen, would you like to just move on to the lecture?
Oh, sure. I'm sorry. I thought this was the intermission part. No worries. I'm confused on the schedule. That's fine. We can start that. So now I go back to, now that I've stopped my screen share, let me start my screen share again. Oh, okay. Does that look good, Wen? Is that filling the screen and?
Yes, I can see it.
Doing everything it's supposed to do?
Yes.
Or do I need to make it more of a full frame? If it's good enough, I'll just start.
Yes, please.
Good. Okay. I call this talk Rhetorical Questions because it's fun. The idea being that it's a lot of questions that we have, such as the one that Rudy just brought up about how do you tackle these big pieces? How do we tackle these difficult poems, these dense poems, these sometimes mysterious uses of language that we encounter in music from the 16th and 17th and sometimes 18th century. And when I started to learn about classical rhetoric, and I'm certainly not a world expert by any means, but I found it to be a tremendously useful tool for unlocking those mysteries. I think all of us who tackle this repertoire are full of questions about how to be more, what we call stylish in our performance, more historically informed, because we recognize that the tools of the time are really the best tools for unpacking this repertoire that doesn't have a lot of, it certainly doesn't have a continuous line of performance for us to follow. For instance, if you want to see what they were doing with Lieder at the end of the previous 2 centuries ago, we have recordings of those people. We can hear what they were doing with portamento, with ornamentation, with vocal color, use of registers, tempi, everything. And we can read about it. There's not so much on the scores for us. There's not so much in terms of a long tradition. We have the stuff that came out in the 60s and 70s, which has already been, completely redone and rethought, and there are new trends now. But of course, the best thing to do is to take the material, analyze the material the way they did, and see if we can find these treasures in that way. So ways that we do this include things like working from facsimiles, so that we know we're looking at the notes the way they looked and not somebody else's, that is editor's interpretation of those notes and texts, I should say, because sometimes that changes too. Some of us work on trying to use historical pronunciation as another tool for articulation and sound, and to make the poems, the rhymes in the poems work better. It also can change the way a note is shaped if you use, say, a different style of diphthongization than we do in modern singing. We all work on, I think we all work on ornamentation, of course. Sometimes we study the sources, or maybe we just listen to videos, things on YouTube, but we do try to understand what adding ornamentation or effetti to these pieces does for them. And of course, we have things like temperament and pitch. In other words, there's a whole range of historical performance practices that we checked, that we look at. But my feeling is that very often we skip step A on our way to steps B, C, and D. And A is the substance of the material at hand. And since we're talking about vocal music, that means the text. How do you pick your music when you go to learn a new piece or put together a concert? You're looking for really good tunes, high notes, really cool, flashy passaggi, lots of virtuosic stuff. But wait a second, songs have words. Songs have words. Do you really know what they mean? I wonder how many of you pick your songs, pick your repertoire based on how cool the poem is. If you don't, you're missing a huge opportunity, and you might not be picking the best music, because very often the best poems don't look flashy on the page. They don't even particularly look interesting on the page. But when you dig deep, you find out that, in fact, a really good poem often has inspired a composer to write really good music, even if it's not immediately obvious. Important too, of course, to know what the original performance intent of the piece was. And that's where a rhetorical will really help you figure it out. If we can disable the doorbells, that would be great. Is that possible, Wen? I'm sorry to say that, but it's quite disturbing to hear this ringing in.
I'll try. I'm not sure if I can do that.
Okay, okay. Maybe if you mute your computer. But if it's ringing on mine, I can't help it. I'll just keep going. Sorry, I just wanted to ask if that was possible. Thank you. So a rhetorical performance is one that has both style and substance. And what I mean by a rhetorical performance is a performance that is grounded in an understanding of the rhetorical bone structure of the piece. It's emotional architecture, if you prefer to say that, what its function was in its own time, and how that function has relevance to us. Rhetoric is both about great big sweeping gestures and also about tiny granular detail. In other words, it can be about the whole compositional structure of a piece, but it can also be about how you pronounce a word or how you articulate a little figure. It's a tool for endlessly fascinating search for meaning. And long after you have mastered a piece, you will be discovering more stuff if you start looking with a rhetorical eye for detail. It's great fun that you can sing a piece for 10 years or put it aside for 10 years and you pick it up again and you say, how did I miss that? Oh my gosh, that's such a cool figure. That's such a cool idea right there. Really, really nice. So to talk about rhetoric and what it means, in his Institutio Ratio Oratorio, the Roman rhetorician Quintilius theorized that an educational path that a young man must follow in order to become a good he theorized the path that a young man must take to become a good rhetorician. And in fact, he said, only through the study of rhetoric, by becoming a vir bonus dicendi peritus, and of course I've said that in real Latin instead of classical Latin, but that means a good man skilled in the art of speaking, can a student become an honest and morally steady citizen? It's really good for us to remember that the word virtue which we think of as being a state of moral rectitude, say, is based on the Latin word vir, for man. And the idea is that man is inherently good, and he becomes better by becoming educated. And part of that education is studying rhetoric. Here I have a few definitions of rhetoric from a variety of sources, because of course this word is bandied about a lot in things like politics, where we talk about empty rhetoric, or the rhetoric of a political person. But of course those are all pretty negative, and originally its meaning was much nicer than that. Wikipedia will tell you that rhetoric is the art of discourse, an art that aims to improve the capability of writers or speakers that attempt to inform, persuade, or motivate particular audiences in specific situations. That's a pretty good definition. Dictionary.com says that it's the undue use of exaggeration or display or bombast. And certainly this is what we're talking about, I think, when we talk about political rhetoric. But then we get the art or science of all specialized literary uses of language in prose and in verse, including the figures of speech, the study of the effective use of language, or the ability to use language effectively. And the classics writers said things like this. Plato, rhetoric is the art of winning the soul by discourse. Aristotle, the faculty of discovering in any particular case all of the available means of persuasion. I love this one for musicians, because this is what we have to do both in the music and in the text, is find all of the available means of persuasion. What is every single tool on the page given to us by the composer, and how can we exploit it? Quintilian says, rhetoric is the art of speaking well. And then my favorite, which is Sappho, says, persuasion is Aphrodite's daughter, Aphrodite being Venus, right, goddess of beauty. Persuasion is Aphrodite's daughter. It is she who beguiles our mortal hearts. So in these definitions, we're finding that we have a very positive view of rhetoric, that the idea of being persuaded is like being seduced. It's something that's delicious and delightful and gives us great pleasure. Some Renaissance writers, and interesting to know that some of this is from things like the prefaces to collections of songs where they talked about rhetoric. Thomas Eliot says that it's the science, interesting that he calls it a science, whereby is taught an artificial form of speaking, wherein is the power to persuade, move, and delight. And of course, by artificial, he means full of artifice, not artificial as in fake or phony. In fact, it's just employing art, right? Thomas Wilson says that rhetoric is none other thing but a stirring or a forcing of the mind, either to desire or else to detest and loathe anything more vehemently than by nature we are commonly wont to do, which is great. Now we're talking about acting, we're talking about bringing an audience to tears or making them laugh where they may have just sort of nodded or chuckled. You know, now we can really make them react. This is just a little quick diagram to show you. It's very interesting to me that rhetoric was sort of grouped with its sister arts and sciences, including grammar, which is on the upper right with the bird nests, dialectic and logic, which is on the bottom with the hounds. Doesn't really matter, but it's just interesting to see all in this dialect, this illustration. Rhetoric is right at the top, where it belongs. Music, the singing swan, you can see the little music notation there. Arithmetic, geometry, and astronomy. So the study of all of these things together was going to make a good, well-educated man, and they were considered equally important and somewhat interrelated. I should add that in a lot of these lists, along with grammar, we get punctuation. That punctuation is a really important element of study for rhetoric. Sorry, I'm going to actually just stop this and hope that my face is what you see and not my desktop. Okay, we'll go on. We need rhetoric. I think that's very clear. It was clear from Rudy's question, and it's clear when we look at the craziness of this repertoire. But you know what? They did too. They needed rhetoric too. I'll just read you a few things from some 17th and 18th century sources where composers are complaining about the singers not having a sufficient grasp of things rhetorical. Giulio Caccini says in his preface to the 1602 Le Nuove Musiche, he says, I see vocal crescendos and decrescendos, esclamazione, tremolos, trills, and all these embellishments of good singing style used indiscriminately. The source of this defect lies in the musician's not really having mastered beforehand the matter he wishes to sing, for if he had, unquestionably, he would not fall into such errors. Those who understand the ideas and the feelings of the words recognize these failings. They know how to distinguish where more affect is needed and where less. In the singer's profession, above all, particular details are of no account. It is the whole that counts. Now, this from a man who wrote pages and pages about how to execute every little tiny ornament, right? Those are the particular details. But he's saying, you know what? If you don't know why you're putting in those ornaments, I don't care if you know how to do those ornaments. It's empty. It's empty rhetoric, right? And think about it also, he's yelling about Italian singers singing in Italian. So this is not a problem of, American students who don't know how to do their languages. It's a problem that he had with his very own students. Marco da Galliano said it in a really fun way in his preface to La Daphne, which is one of the earliest operas ever. He says, where the sense does not demand it, leave aside every ornament, so as not to be like that painter who knew how to paint cypress trees and therefore painted them everywhere. Instead, try to pronounce every syllable distinctly so that the words are understood. And I love that idea of the cypress trees, but you've all heard it. There's a singer who has their patented ornament, and by golly, they find every opportunity to put it in, whether it means something or not. We need to not be like that painter in the cypress trees. Note the lack of substance here. We're losing the forest for the trees. In our eagerness to interpret, we make all kinds of decisions. We make tempo decisions, we make articulation, instrumentation, ornamentation decisions long before we have all the information. And we start adding elements of style and before we have mastered the matter at hand, as Caccini said. And Tosi in the 18th century says something similar. He says, oh, how great a master is the heart. Confess it, my beloved singers, and gratefully own that you would not have arrived at the highest rank of the profession if you had not been its scholars, meaning the heart's scholars. Own that in a few lessons from your heart you learned the most beautiful expressions, the most refined taste, the most noble actions, and the most exquisite graces. Own that when the heart sings, you cannot dissemble, nor has truth a greater power of persuading. And lastly, convince the world that from the heart alone, you have learned that je ne sais quoi, I think that's a funny translation, but you have learned that special something, that pleasing charm that so subtly passes from vein to vein and makes its way to the very soul. And so what is he talking about if not substance? One of the things that Tosi complained about was when composers started writing the ornaments on the music, instead of the singers just putting them in where they knew they belonged. He thought that was treating the singers like children who didn't know enough about rhetoric and about text to be able to choose their own ornaments. And he was outraged by that. So what is he talking about if not substance? He's talking about listen to your heart, listen to the music, understand the meaning of the words. So let's talk about how we can start to extract this substance from the written page of music and text. Words matter, of course. We often say prima la parola, right? But Thomas Mace said about church music, but I think it stands for secular music as well, that there are two things very considerable as to this preparation of good singing. First, the poetry. Secondly, the composition of the music. So if we are choosing our songs for that list of other things I named, high notes, fast notes, blah, 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 we're missing the mark. We should be looking at the text first and then deciding if we like what's being done with it. Now, I often ask singers when they come into a class, bring me a new piece in their lessons, to tell me what the piece is about. And not because I can't tell the translation, because I want to know how they're thinking about it. And I very often get these long stories, I mean, really elaborate stories with long and complex plots where they've created a whole world for their character and a pre-story and a post-story and everything else. But a lot of times we don't yet know what the words mean. And the emotions have been just reduced to happy and sad. I think we need to understand our texts from several standpoints. One is the literal meaning. So obviously we need to get good translations when we start. We need the structural meaning. We need the intent of the composer or the poet. And then we need the context. And some of these things will become clear as I talk a little bit longer, but context, for instance, was it part of an opera? Was it from a song collection? Was it written for a special diva to show off a particular ability of her voice, etc., that sort of thing? Good to know that before we start. So some things you can do right away is, first of all, make sure that you know what every word means in its time. So resources for that would include looking at the OED. And even if you are fluent in English or native in English and you think you know what a word means, if there's something funny about a phrase, do not hesitate to look those words up in a good historical dictionary like the Oxford English Dictionary, which will tell you the history of the word, its etymology, but also its usage through different periods. And sometimes those meanings change over time. There are also really great resources, like there are lots of them, but two that I use all the time are the Florio 1598 and 1611 Italian English dictionaries, and Cotgrave's French English dictionary, I think, is also 1611-ish. Is that right, Jeffrey? I see you nodding. I think that's correct. Which gives us that, again, just the meaning at the beginning of the 17th century. So super helpful. And then there are various others for the 18th century. I work more in 17th century texts, so those are my favorites. But they're all online, or you can get them from somebody like me, or I can send them to Jeffrey and he can disseminate them if you don't have them on your computer. They're great resources. Maybe next is to understand the purpose of the text. Is it a complaint? Is it an invitation or a flirtation, for instance? Is it a lament? Is it humorous? Is it a stock form? One that we, the same kind of a genre piece, like a mad song, say. If we understand that, we're going to start to see that there are traditions for each of these genres that help us understand the structure, because it's a traditional structure and one we can look for in our piece. Humor is a tough one. I'll just say that now and again. It can be hard to figure out when something is tongue-in-cheek. And I'm going to give a good example of that in a little bit. But humor is hard. I'll just say that. It's good to identify the speaker. Is it male or female? Is the speaker noble? Is the speaker common? Is the speaker even burlesque? And so we have common and burlesque are not the same thing. A common speaker would be perhaps a shepherd or a shepherdess, someone of low station, but who is not yet a comic character, a burlesque character, like a clown or a mad person, or say a villain, which can be both a noble character and a burlesque one. And next, and this is an ongoing project, not just for the piece you're working on, but certainly for the piece, is develop a really big emotional vocabulary, so that we don't get this happy sad business. But with happy, we might start with content or satisfied and move on to cheerful or jolly or happy or joyful or ecstatic and exhilarated. So we have a range of emotion that goes from maybe small to large. Same thing with sadness. We could say languid, we could say sad, oppressed, mournful, despondent, annoyed, frustrated, furious, enraged. And if you can write these little adjectives in your music to say, what's the tone here? Where does it start? And where does it go? Because a lot of times it'll change. It might start sort of in the acceptance stage of grief, and then go into the outraged denial stage of grief, and then end up feeling resigned. But if we don't recognize all those different emotional ideas, again, we might miss stuff on the page that would help us make that clear. Another thing to make sure you're to the best of your ability, you understand is the poetic form. And luckily, a lot of our modern critical editions will tell you what the poetic form is. If you're looking at Caccini, say, and you look in the AR editions, which you maybe have used, Wiley Hitchcock's edition, he tells you whether it's in settenario verse or ottava rima or a sestina or any of those poetic forms, but they often have meaning. Just the way that the librettist chooses the poetic form that matches the kind of text it is. And if it doesn't match up, that should ring little bells in your head. So for noble or heroic or serious verse, and here I'm talking about Italian. I don't have time today to go into the French forms, and every language has its own, every tradition has its own forms, and you can read about it, learn about it. The Frottelé have a whole pile of forms that I don't quite yet understand. The French have a bunch of forms, but in Italian, when we get settenario verse, which is 7 syllables. This is one of the noble forms. So if you see a soliloquy by Orfeo, or one of the other noble characters, Proserpina, etc., it will usually be in either settenario or in endecasillabo, the 11 syllable lines. And 7s and 11 often alternate, but when you count them up, that'll give you a clue. So you don't have to recognize it, just count on you'll see me in rehearsals all the time. I'm going, yes, that's ottava rima, right? Ottava rima is another one, and this is one that, big works like the Gerusalemme Liberata of Torquato Tasso, the source of all these crusade stories like Tancredi and Clorinda and so on, are written in ottava rima, 8-line strophes of 11 syllables each line. A sestina is another. This one's kind of rare, but I like to throw it in because it's such a cool one. A sestina has 6 6-line strophes. Every strophe ends with one of the same 6 words, but in alternation. So it's a super complicated form and very cool. You run into them now and again, and it's one of the noble kind of learned forms. Now, light or comic or pastoral verse tends to be in triple meters. I should say in contrast to that, these noble and serious verses are usually in duple meters. This is a very interesting thing about thought about male and female nature in the 16th and 17th century, is that things that were stable, duple, and rational were more masculine, and things that were unstable, triple, and irrational were more female. And I'm going to show you some examples of how musical rhetoric makes that really clear in some of the songs that we look at. But that's why light or comic or pastoral or inconsequential verse is often set to triple meters. And things like an overriding hemiola can break that all apart, which is very interesting on certain kinds of text. An example of a big clue, and I'm going to go back to sharing now, for how the poetic form can be a giveaway, is this. There is an Italian verse style called sdrucciola, which is one in which the accent on the words is on the penultimate syllable instead of on the usual, the anti-penultimate syllable, as opposed to the penultimate syllable, like we have arrivederci or spaghetti, the words that have that late accent. In sdrucciola, they come 2 back from the end, and it means, the word sdrucciola also means glib or slippery. And so it has this kind of comic effect that is sometimes obvious, such as in this song by Tarquinio Merula, which is sort of, well, I'll stop loving you, I'll stop thinking about you when pigs fly, is what we would say, or when hell freezes over. But here's a whole bunch of very funny examples that in Italian just sound ridiculous. Zoccoli, buffoli, broccoli, zoffoli, moccoli, tartuffoli, cicoria, memoria. And we get these very funny sdrucciole at the end of the words that make it sound silly when it's sung. And of course the meaning is obvious. We're talking about, roses and lilies will produce broccoli, and frogs are going to play panpipes, and so on. Sort of silly things. If anybody wants this piece, I can send it to them. So get in touch with me via Wen. It's pretty fun. But sometimes it's not so obvious. And this is the thing I was busy sticking in here when I was late to the class today, is that this is a poem that was set both by Ferrari, who was the composer of the piece that Rudy sang earlier, but also famously by Monteverdi. And it looks like a fairly serious poem on the surface of it. We have, I want to die, I want my bones to be dust and my limbs to fall into ashes. And, you know, it's very dramatic and descriptive of his torments. And then he says, fine, let me proceed into the tomb. I'm dying now and forgive me for ever having loved you. Very, very serious sounding poem. Now, we have two clues that this piece is not as serious as it looks, but they're both in the music. One's in the text and one's in the music. In the text, look, we've got a whole bunch of sdrucciolo again. So we have cadano, cenere, vadano, tenere, trattengono, venere, etc. throughout the whole poem. Additionally, it's written on the chaconna. For the first four verses is on the chaconna, which I've already mentioned, is a musical form that has its roots in sort of lascivious bawdy song. So immediately it should make us kind of wonder. It has the same triggers as maybe 12-bar blues has for us. We hear 12-bar blues, we know we're not going to hear a funny song, right? We're pretty much sure we're going to hear the blues, and then we just know it. So they hear the chaconna and they know they're going to hear a sassy song. So we get that. So this piece is one of many, many pieces in the 17th century literature, which is really a tour de force of wit. There's a great paper, if you want to read, by a musicologist named Roger Freitas, which is called The Italian Cantata and the Rage for Wit, in which he talks about this fad for finding a new way to tell an old story in a way that will just make everyone gasp at your cleverness. So it's not about the story itself. The story is the same old, right? Boy loves girl doesn't pay attention, he gets frustrated, he's sad, he's tortured, et cetera, et cetera. We just get that same old story over and over again. But when we tell it in some new way with new rhetorical figures in the text or the music, that is the thing that people will admire you for. And I'm going to show you a really, what I think is a very cool example of that in a little bit. Now, that's very helpful if we are dealing with Italian, but sometimes even when we are working in a language we think we understand, we can get some help. I'm saying translating English. I'm saying this for those who are fluent or native. Here's a Dowland song with a text that's possibly by Robert Devereux, who was, Elizabeth I's suitor who never got anywhere with her. And this text is very often misinterpreted because it's such an odd use of English. So I've got the original on the left, and then I have a transcription on the right where I have put in, I've modernized the spellings and put in some punctuation so that we might understand it better. But even then, to understand these metaphors and what they are about, it can be helpful to think about them ourselves or look at a resource for this. I have a sadly undocumented set of paraphrases of Dowland songs that someone gave me or I found online and downloaded. I'm really embarrassed that I do not know whose work it is, but it's something I'm happy to share with anybody who might find it useful. This poetry scholar, went through and actually paraphrased all 4 books of Dowland songs, the 3 books of songs and then the Pilgrim's Solace. So I don't agree with all of his solutions. In fact, I'll tell you one that's in this one that I think is wrong, but it's a start and it's a way for us to try to understand something that we might look at and say, oh, well, I get it, I know all these words. So the first line, for instance, can she excuse my wrongs with virtue's cloak? I think a lot of people have thought that this means, can she pardon me for what I did wrong with virtue's cloak? But that makes no sense at all, right? When we realize that in Elizabethan syntax, what this means is, can she excuse the wrongs she did to me by calling it, by saying, I did it because I am virtuous. So when you know a little bit about Elizabeth, you know that she did not want to have a lover. She did not want to marry Devereux. She said she was going to be the Virgin Queen. So she is cloaked in her virtue, and that's why she can treat him badly and spurn him again and again. So already we get a correction that helps us understand the poem better. Shall I call her good when she proves unkind? Am I supposed to just, I mean, guy is basically saying I'm being gaslighted. You know, I'm not supposed to say, oh, you're so wonderful, Queen Elizabeth. Oh, yes, you're all good and all virtuous. And she's treating me like garbage. It's horrible. Are those clear fires which vanish into smoke? This is one of the lines where I disagree with the guy who wrote the paraphrases, because he thinks this means, are my true passions meant to just dissipate like smoke? I think this is about, like when a fire burns cleanly, if the wood is dry or the gas line is not clogged with debris, we get a clear fire. And smoky fires usually mean dirt or moisture or something nasty in the fire. So I think this is about the her intent and her supposed passion for him. And again, must I praise the leaves where no fruit I find, I think is a direct comment on her refusal to have children. So she will not marry him and procreate. And I think that's what that's a comment on. I can move through this kind of quickly. He then says, no, where shadows do for bodies stand. And we need to know that shadows are not just the shadow of light, of shade in the light, but shadows mean ghosts in the Elizabethan language, just like, you know, the ombra in Italian is what they use for ghosts or dead bodies in hell, in the upper world that are visible. So where shadows do for bodies stand, thou mayst be abused if thy sight be dim. And abused, again, is a funny word, but if you, in this context, so if you look it up, you find that abused can also mean you may be deceived if your sight be dim. So if you're not really paying attention, you can be fooled. You can be gaslit, to use a modern word. The next one's pretty easy. Cold love is like words written on sand, or like bubbles which swim on the water, and so on. And then his complaint, then he speaks to himself. You're gonna put up with this forever? I don't think so. You're never gonna get any place. So when we take the time to work our way through these poems with the help of a scholar or an article, or even just our own research looking in old dictionaries, we can get such a richer understanding of the text, which is fantastic. Then you'll find things like, maybe you've sung Flow My Tears, Fall From Your Springs by Dowland, and at the end it says, hark, you shadows that in darkness dwell, learn to contemn light. And not only in many editions is this changed to condemn, but I've heard people who are reading the word contemn with the T change it, thinking it's a misspelling, but it isn't. It means, contemn means to shun or to avoid. So when we have contempt for someone, we shun them, we avoid them. It's kind of the only fragment, remnant of that meaning we have left. There's another Dowland song where there's called Fine Necks for Ladies, and there's a peddler saying, you know, even the poorest among us is worthy of being loved. And he uses as a metaphor, sometimes in shell the orient'st pearls we find. And Fellows, the guy who made all the modern, I think it's international editions of the lute songs, changed it to a possessive, the orient's pearls we find, meaning the pearls of the Orient. But Diana Poulton points out in her book on John Dowland that orient'st is a contraction for orientist, which was a perfectly good superlative term in Elizabethan English. And so, in fact, that's correct. Now, let's be honest here. It's, if you sing this, it goes by really, it says, sometimes in shell the orient'st pearls we find. Guess what? No one's going to know which one you said. But let's also face facts. We do this music because we geek out on it. We love it. It's wonderful for us to just know that. Even if in our performance we can't transmit that. How wonderful to pay attention to those details and understand the poem that well for ourselves. I think it's worth the effort, even if it doesn't go any further. So let me go on. Rhetoric, to get back to rhetorical analysis, is powerful tool, as I said to Rudy, for the interpretation of artful, complex, lofty text, things that are just too big to chew in one bite. It can help us understand that dense poetry. It can help us organize the long narrative, etc. Of course, it's an enormous area of study. Volumes and volumes and volumes comprise rhetorical dictionaries of rhetorical figures. But I think it's very useful for us to, just like we use, let's face it, singers, we use a tiny fraction of the International Phonetic Alphabet to be able to work in the languages that we sing. If you look at the thing they use to transcribe languages that include sounds we don't get, like clicks and certain kinds of diphthongs and triphthongs that are almost inaudible to us in most of the Western world, we can take our subset and we can use it to help us organize our thoughts and our way of looking at the music. So let me just show you some ideas of, oops, come on, there we go. Yeah, thank you. Historically, the art and science, or maybe I should say art and science of rhetoric is divided into 5 primary areas, and Cicero named them as the inventio, the dispositio, the elocutio, the memoria, the pronunciatio. So the presenting of the problem, the elaboration of the argument, the way that you perform it, memorizing it, and then the actual performance itself. Rhetoric is speech designed to persuade, as we said before. So the inventio would be the finding and the understanding of the subject matter. This piece is a lament of Iole on the death of Hercules. Then we go to the dictionary or the encyclopedia or Wikipedia or whatever we use, and we find out who the heck is Iole and who's Hercules and why did he die and why is she lamenting, and we get all kinds of backstory. Really, really helpful for understanding, right? Then we have the dispositio, which is the ordering of the material for the argument. And when we say the argument, we don't mean sort of the fight about it, but rather the making of our case. So if I'm telling you, I'm lamenting the death of my husband, and your friend says, well, gosh, you guys didn't seem to really get along that well, then you're going to come out there and explain why this is important anyway, or why you're feeling the way you do. Elocutio is where you decorate, where you amplify and decorate your text with rhetorical figures. This is both text figures and for us in musical figures. And memoria, memorization, which they felt was a very important part of it. Unfortunately, we don't do this so much in early music, but except in opera or other staged works, but it's an amazing step in the process if you have the luxury of time to do it. Pronunciatio, the performance of the material, which is also, I love that it's part of the process. Now, the dispositio, where we order up the material, we put the material in order for the argument, is where our real nitty-gritty work gets done, and that is where we divide it into the exordium, the description of the problem or the point. I love this woman and she doesn't know I'm alive. The narratio, the telling of the story. I admired her from afar, and then finally I got up the courage to speak, and then she turned away and didn't pay attention to me. Confirmatio, the presentation of evidence for your point. And you know what? I'm worthy of her love because I am noble, or I did all the right things. I followed the correct etiquette of presenting my love, and yet she still doesn't. Refutatio, disproving the arguments against your case. You say, you may say that I'm not worthy because X, Y, and Z, but I will show you why you're wrong, and you do that. And then the conclusion, therefore, I'll keep on loving her, or therefore, I'm out of here. They're both kinds of endings, right? And we get them both. Sometimes they're a surprise. There's a good example of this is the female lament. The female lament almost always goes through a certain number of phases, weeping, 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 anger, conjuring up monsters or forces of nature to destroy the evil lover who hurt your feelings, and then a collapse on the floor saying, what am I thinking? I must be out of my mind because after all, I'm female and I'm irrational. I'm out of my mind. And then mostly they then die. And there is one, and this is one of my favorite pieces by Giovanni Sanchez, where it's the lament of Proserpina on Pluto. And it starts out with her saying, he's been gone 3 days and 3 nights, and I know perfectly well what he's doing. because he was a philanderer and she knew. And when we get to the end, where she normally would just collapse on the floor in a heap and weep, she says, you know what? I've had enough of this. I'm going to go join Diana and the huntresses in the woods and just live with the women. Very unusual ending and a really cool piece. And if you didn't have that context of knowing that genre and its normal rhetorical structure, you wouldn't know how remarkable that was at the end of the lament of Proserpina. So I want to look at a couple pieces of music now. Mostly just the text, but this is another one by Tarquinio Merula, and this is a lovely piece that's on a passacaglia. So it's kind of both duple and triple, right? It's a 4-bar passacaglia, which is duple, and then internally it's triple meter. So maybe we've got both feelings going on here. What was my point with this? Yes, we have the exordium is, whoever thinks that just because he threatens me or he tries to steal away my beloved, that I'm going to give her up, is crazy. He might as well change his mind if he thinks that my imprisoned heart would rather be free. Because, of course, when you are a prisoner of love, you are most happy, right? So they love to play with this idea of imprisonment and liberty as being opposite what we would, it's a dichotomy, it's a paradox, rather, what we normally think. So he can say whatever he wants. He can say whatever he thinks. Now, here's a little confirmation. So, as I said, you can try it with jealousy. Megera, who's a sorceress, you could invoke magic, and a sorceress can pour venom on us to try to break my faith by supernatural means. I could die, but it will never be that this precious bond that imprisons me will loosen. Say what you want, say what you will. And the concluding verse is, time and place will be mine. I will be able to vent my love sickness being an imbalance in the body's humors that are brought on by this unbalanced, this unrequited emotion, to temper my love's secret fire. And among the shades and the horrors of the nocturnal splendors, in other words, in the starry night, in the cover of darkness, my dear will hide herself, and I will find her, and we will enjoy our love, despite all of this that's happened before. And that's the conclusion. So you might say, well, what's the big deal? It's just a 3-strophe poem. But if you're trying to think of a way in a strophic song to vary the tone of each verse, maybe you've got more than one continuo instrument. You want to decide whether you're going to have, lutes or harpsichord or harp, or I think on this piece you could even use a lirone because the ground is so slow. You could choose colors in the accompaniment. You could do what I was talking to Rudy about. You could have a bass tempo that gets more excited, say, in the second verse, when you're singing about jealousy and evil flames and poison. And then the last verse, you might kind of sit on the back side of the beat and be very, very smug and satisfied and sure of yourself because you know everything's going to come out right. So having just even that really basic structure can be super helpful in making your big architecture, your big idea of your rhetoric. Another one, and I know this will be familiar to so many of them, but it's a really quick, really short version of this same kind of structure. But the exordium. Don't you believe that I love you, Amaryllis? Let me prove it to you. Here we go into the dispositio. Believe me, but if you don't believe me, then here, I've got proof. Take my arrow, open my heart, and you will see the conclusion is Amaryllis is my love. An interesting thing about thinking about this text is that a lot of editions put a breath in a really unfortunate place. There are several problems with breathing in the wrong place in this piece. The one that really makes me crazy is the final one, where the question here is not who is my love, but that Amaryllis is my love. And that is really clear in the musical rhetoric by where Caccini puts the strong word on the strong beat. I'll give you the example. The final little kind of coda at the end of the piece, the repetition of Amaryllis is my love, goes something like this. Amarilli il mio amor, so on and so on with decorations. The editors will put a breath, because they don't want the singer to breathe anywhere, so they'll put a breath in between words that shifts the meaning. Amarilli è il mio amor. And then it suddenly becomes Amaryllis is my love, as opposed to Amaryllis is my love, right? So don't you believe that you are my love? Yeah. You could probably argue this back and forth, but when you look at the facsimile and you see that Caccini writes a slur in there so that you won't breathe, he makes an elision. Amarilli è il mio amore. It's, 3 vowels really tucked in there. It really changes how it feels. And then, of course, if you know that it's perfectly fine to breathe in a melisma, you'll just sing Amarilli è il mio amore, and breathe somewhere in that long string of pearls that he writes for affetti at the end. So you can think about that. Sometimes it's clear from the composer, sometimes it's your choice, but know that you're making effects when you do that. Here's a terrific piece by Barbara Strozzi, L'amante segreto. Where we get an alternation of this refrain, voglio morire piuttosto che il mio mal venga a scoprire. I would rather die than have people find out how I feel about this. And then we get a series of recitatives in the middle, each one ending with ma io voglio morire. And you can see that ma coming in at the end of the second bit of poetry here, La bella donna mia. So that ma is an important word, and that's one we should recognize in rhetorical structures, that indicates that we're going to shift away from the direction we seem to be heading and go into another direction or back to the original direction. So you could imagine this verse of poetry changing. That when she turns to him nicely and says, "Well, honey, tell me what's wrong," and the music really bears this out in the way that it sounds very, very sweet and very kind. She can see how I fret and pine, and the next line could be, "So I decided to just go ahead and tell her what I was feeling," but it says ma, and then the tessitura dips down a sixth, and we get this kind of layered effect in the music. Did I put the music in here? No, I did not. That sort of shows us that the speaker is second guessing himself and saying, "Oops, I didn't really mean to say that out loud. I think I'm going to go back to my refrain of I'd rather die than be told." Here we get these arguments. Let me explain to you how I feel. The first one says, the first strophe is, "Oh, things are terrible. I look at this woman I'm adoring, and I can't speak. I can't make the words come out of my mouth." When she gives him a chance to speak, he can't. The next strophe, "I'm like that grass." Let me give you an example of how I feel, and this explains further how this guy comes to life when she's around, but is so fearful that he would rather die again. Ma io voglio morire piuttosto che il mio mal venga a scoprire. And in the end, interestingly, we get this piece is another one that's written on a ground bass. And the bass breaks at the end. Right here, for the first time, we go back into a little bit of recitative and then a final passacaglia, where he fights back. And he says, we hear this in the music, the musical form changes, and we hear it in the text, where he no longer complains. He no longer says, "Oh, poor me, come to my pity party. Let me tell you how awful things are for me." He says, "You know what? Cupid, love, stop picking on me and go pick on somebody your own size. There is no honor in pushing somebody over the edge who's already half dead, right? Got one foot in the grave. Big man, aren't you?" And it's very interesting that the speaker fights back at the end and we get a breaking of all musical form before. So if there was any doubt in your mind, it's borne out by the musical rhetoric. Before we go further, I thought we would talk a little bit about musical rhetoric and some of the I'm going to skip over this because I just talked about it. And some examples of rhetorical figures in music. We have comments from some music theorists who are not writing particularly about singers, but who say things such as this. Michael Praetorius says, the concern of an orator, and keep in mind that singers, preachers, orators, actors, anybody who did any kind of public discourse, actually just even in good society, you were expected to speak rhetorically and eloquently. So all of this applies to all of us. The concern of an orator is not only to adorn an oration with beautiful, pleasant, and vivid words and magnificent figures. Notice all the adjectives here. Beautiful, pleasant, vivid, magnificent. So we get a real range of power in these ideas. But it's also to pronounce correctly and to move the affections, and thus the song may achieve the purpose for which it was made. And he's talking about musical figures here. Thomas Mace says that observing the nature of the words so as to suit them with the same likeness of conceit or humor from his art is our goal. Sorry, lopped off the beginning of it. There being a very great affinity, nearness, naturalness, or sameness betwixt language and music, although this is not known to many. It always makes me laugh when we feel like we're so ignorant this way in the future, but in fact they were struggling with a lot of the same things that we do. And one of my very favorite rhetorical devices that gets short shrift, especially from people who think that to sing recitative, you should just ram through all the rest because what are they there for anyway? We might think, well, why did they bother to write them? That's a lot of ink, wasted a lot of space on the page when paper and ink were expensive. Hildebrand Jacob, who was an 18th century British poet and playwright, writes this about the rhetoric of silence. And he says, a break or a pause in poetry is sometimes more significant than anything that might have been said. And so in music, a rest in its proper place often has a wonderful surprise, and from the beauty of its surprise makes the suspension of the harmony itself agreeable. And I think we do this all the time in modern speech without even thinking about it. When we see somebody and we want to describe something fantastic, you could say, oh, I had the most amazing dessert last night. You know, and we start using pauses between our words to outline, almost like cloisonne in art. You know, it outlines what we're saying. We grab the listener's attention because it's going to be super important. And so we use that in speech all the time, and it's there in music too. Rests should always be considered notes that don't sound. They are notes, they are inhalations, exhalations, they have tension, they have release, they have continuity, they have break. Rests are so expressive. If you took nothing else away from this talk today but that, I would be a happy girl. I think I need to get going because we have more singers to sing, so let me move through this a little more quickly. You can look this up on your own. You don't need to, this is such a short list, but to give you an idea of rhetorical terms, and they're tons of fun. They're mostly based in Greek, which means I can't remember them for 2 seconds. I can never remember epiphora and anadiplosis and anaphora. These are all sounds that go away, but reading the words go away. But reading the descriptions, you realize that every sort of remarkable thing you see in a text is probably a rhetorical figure. Opposition, antithesis, we know that one. Apostrophe, turning from the general audience to address a specific group or person absent or present. This is like when actors break that fourth wall and address the audience. You know, Woody Allen looking into the camera and speaking directly to us. That's apostrophe. That's a rhetorical figure. Assonance, cacophony, climax, the idea that things grow from small to large, from low to high, from cool to hot, all of those things. I sit, I sigh, I weep, I faint, I die, etc. So you get the idea. But look these up online. They're endless examples, and they're really fun to read. And a lot of the sites where you'll see them will give you examples of each one. So if the definition doesn't make sense, you'll get it from that. And I thought I would do a little bit of looking at this piece by Purcell, because we're going to hear some Purcell in a few minutes, and so I thought it would be fun to look at this. This is a speech by the God of Dreams from the Indian Queen, as I said, John Dryden and Henry Purcell. And the people have come to the oracle to say, what's going to happen to us? What's our future? What's our fate? And the The god of dreams says, you must not know, you shall not pass, don't ask me any questions, I'm not supposed to let you know. And so we get this wonderful text, seek not to know what must not be revealed, joys only flow where fate is most concealed. Too busy man would find his sorrows more if future fortunes he should know before. For by that knowledge of his destiny, he would not live at all, but always die, and so on. Rhetorical repetition of important words occurs in this piece, and it goes along with melodic musical rhetoric. So we get, seek not to know what must not be revealed. So the must nots get higher and higher and are repeated 3 times for emphasis. Similarly, I'm going quickly into the little recitative section. We get, enquire not then who shall from bonds be free? Who 'tis shall wear a crown, or who shall bleed. So you can hear chromaticism to paint bleeding. You can hear the repetition of who being higher and higher from the issue of slavery, the lowest of the low, to the highest of the high, those who wear crowns. So this is painted not only in the text, but clearly in the music. I'm going to move on, again, because I have millions of examples. One of my favorites is in this lovely piece by Michel Lambert. I'm sorry, this is my only romp into French land, but your neglect every day causes me 1,000 worries, but I love my fate. Remember what I said about the word ma in Italian? Here we have it in French as in me. So the line, your neglect causes me all these worries, is set totally against this lovely Passacaglia again, where we get a dam, da, di, da. Vous mépris chaque jour me cause mille alarmes. Feel that big hemiola fighting against the bass line and the initial expression of the text being set on the second beat of a triple bar, which is an unstable beat. Then we get the next line, mais je chéris mon sort, je chéris mon sort bien qu'il soit rigoureux. And 2 things happen here. But I treasure my fate is in nice, regular triple rhythm, very easy, stable. But when it goes into je chéris mon sort, and we know that his fate is bad, we suddenly break the Passacaglia with an F natural instead of an F sharp in the key signature, and we go into hemiola, breaking it again. So you can see how if you were unaware of those things, you might not accentuate them in your performance, but if you did, you would bring out so much more clearly your what the composer has tried to do to make that text more vivid, and then you're really using the tools that you've been given. So I'm going to check in with Wen now because I think I've gone way over because I love talking about this so much. Is it time to go on to singers?
No, you actually still have like 15 minutes. Actually, 4 minutes. Sorry. So if you have a question.
I could do questions. Why not?
Okay. So anyone has any questions, you can free to speak up or just type in the chat.
Will you read me the chat, Win?
Yes, I will.
Thanks.
There's no question.
No questions? If there are no questions, I'm going to show you another really cool example. Yeah?
Go ahead.
Okay, I'm going to do it. This is the first speech that Orpheus makes in Monteverdi's Orfeo. Remember that Orpheus is the most amazing singer in the world, right? Orpheus is just the most skilled, the most amazing singer. And he comes out and he sings this, which is musically very, very simple, right? On the page, nothing but G minor, no high notes, no fast notes, nothing really fancy here at all. What in the world is this about? Well, I think it's about this. I think that Orpheus is a master of rhetoric, and I think he shows his extraordinary ability to move the rocks and the stones and the animals with rhetoric and not with vocal pyrotechnics. He saves that for the creatures in the underworld who are crude and ignoble. Those who are noble get moved by this. And so we get this fantastic tour de force here in this poem of rhetorical figures that create internal tension in a really amazing way. So the first strophe is the exordium. This is where he addresses his father, Apollo, and he says, he calls him the rose of heaven, the life of the world, the son of him who holds the reign of the universe, that's Jove. He is the sun, Apollo, who circles and sees everything in his starry course. Apollo drives his chariot around and causes sunrise and sunset and so on. And he says to him, have you ever seen anybody as happy as me? Right? So that's the exordium. Is there anybody as happy as me? And then he explains why he thinks there isn't anybody as happy as him. Because, and this is where it gets very cool, fu ben felice il giorno. So we have an adjective and an adverb, ben felice, a very happy day, giorno, period of time. Mio ben, my dear, che pria ti vidi, when I first saw you, so she could be far away, across a room. He saw her, he fell in love. He was quite happy that day. E più felice l'ora, and even more happy, now we're going to use superlatives, more happy, l'ora, the shorter period of time, che per te sospirai, when I sighed for you, perché al mio sospirar tu sospirasti, because I heard you sigh back. That means she's closer. So the physical distance has shortened because he can now hear her. The time has shortened, but the emotion has grown. And then he says, felicissimo il punto che la candida mano pegno di pura fede a me porgesti. So the most happy of all, the highest of the emotions, came in the moment, this short period of time when you extended your hand to me, which means they are within reaching distance. And I think this kind of use of rhetoric in the poetry probably made, the idea was that everybody at the wedding party just went, ah, because he just gave the most eloquent toast in a way that you could ever hear. And a wonderful thing to know, then he uses some pretty common images at the bottom. Yeah, I'm as, even if I had as many hearts as the sky has stars and as many hills, many leaves as there are on the trees, blah, blah. That's really kind of ordinary poetic language. That's proves his conclusion. So even if I used ordinary language, it would be clear that I'm the happiest man alive. And when Eurydice answers him in her very sort of modest little speech, she shows her nobility by using another kind of wonderful rhetorical device or rhetorical speech, I should say, when she says, don't ask me how I feel. I can't tell you because my heart is no longer my own. I gave it to love. And so you will have to ask him how I feel about you. And so it's this very sweet, short, one device, one example, but it sort of puts her in an equivalent position of nobility, but a lesser position of virtuosity. And I think it's just a really interesting way that Monteverdi and Rinuccini helped us understand these characters at the very beginning of this piece. So even if you don't know the story of Orpheus and Eurydice, you would be clued in to the situation that they are in. So I hope I have convinced you, to use the words of a great teacher of rhetoric and physical gesture, that the devil is in the details. It's worth doing the work. It's always fun to do the work, and you will reap great rewards in your interpretations if you pay attention to this business of rhetoric.
Okay, great. Thank you. So you probably can't see me here. What I'm going to do is now we're going to take a 15-minute break. I'm going to show two examples of Alan's recording, and meanwhile we'll be back in about 15 minutes. But if you just stick around. enjoy the music, this will show, give a good example of what she is talking about in the lecture. So enjoy the music.
Thank you, Wen.
Weichet, weichet, weichen von mir alle Übeltäter. Denn der Herr hört mein Weinen. Der Herr hört mein Flehen. Mein Gebet nimmt der Herr an.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Thank you, Maya. Yeah, wonderful to hear. I love your voice. I love all the colors that you brought to this piece. I think you have some terrific ideas. And what I would love to do is go through this now with you and see if we can find ways to give you permission to go a little further with those ideas. If you just heard this talk about rhetoric, you know there are tons of things in the music that can be exploited that we can make more of for you to make this even more exciting. I think a couple of things to recognize right away that seem obvious, of course, is that we have a structure for the whole piece, which is a refrain, "Oh, let me weep," that comes back over and over again, and then you sort of explain why in all these little internal sections. Start looking for the text. Yes, and say what your reaction is going to be. So you're going to you say, "I will never see him anymore. I will never be able to sleep. I'm going to hide myself from the light of day." In other words, I'm going to stay in the dark all the time. I'm going to be in a dark room with the windows. I don't want to see the light of the sun. I'm going to wallow in my sorrow, and so on. So, and then he's gone, and we finally know why you are sad. He is gone. His loss you will always deplore. And then you return to the refrain. So this refrain can have a really wonderful framing function for you. We talked about this in the Ferrari and also in the talk about how a bass tempo for your whole piece can then be flexed to suit the mood of what you're doing next. I'm going to suggest to you that you pick up your tempo a little bit. I think sometimes we see these sad pieces and we start thinking at the smallest note value of being slow. And in this piece, we might be thinking of a half note as being slow. And I'm going to propose to you that Purcell's idea is that the bar is slow, so that we don't get a feeling of counting three, but counting a big one. So, pam, pa-dum, pa-dee-da-da, da-dee-dum, pum, pa, oh, oh, let me, oh, and so on, so that you have it's slow on the basis of a 4-bar phrase and not so much in terms of the little notes. And I hope, I can't see you well enough to know, but I hope you're breathing a sigh of relief because it's very, very hard. Is it okay? Can you hear me okay? Okay, great. Because it can feel just kind of agonizingly logy. I'm sorry, do we need to fix something for you now, or? It's fine. I see the screen is over there and you're looking at my face. Perfectly fine. Thank you. I get it now. The wonders of Zoom. So that's the first thing, is to realize that you can have a tempo for this refrain which is a little less heavy and more, when you think about it, this speaker is in agony, and agony is not a slow and depressed state of mind, is it? It's a shaking your fists. He's gone, and you got really passionate in that section. Perfect, right on. I think you'll be even more able to bring that across if you allow the tempo to surge forward a little bit at that point. And let me show you some markers for that, but first I want to go back to the refrain. The refrain starts on beat 2, which, as we know, in triple rhythm is a very unstable beat. And so right away, we know that this person is in a state of despair. She's rending, in a Baroque sense, you're rending your garments and you're taking your hairband out and letting everything look wild, because that was what women did when they lamented, is that they lost their decorum, their clothing and their hair and all their perfect appearance for public would fall apart. So this is showing us that you, by coming in on that second beat and with this little schleicher that comes up from underneath, "Oh, let me," in the second iteration, it's showing us just how unstable you are. So that's another reason to have the big 1, is that we're going to feel that instability better than if you're at a sort of a steady 3 and then it's just the second beat. It's not really such a big deal. The other thing is that you interrupt yourself a lot in this. So you say in the second phrase, Oh, let me weep. And you that little let me is quick and unfinished. Remember we talked in the Rudy's piece in the Ferrari that if you don't finish a word with grace and poise, oh, let me weep, he could have written, but he didn't. He wrote it in a way that means that you stammered over your final words and then you interrupted yourself and you went to the highest note of the piece in a kind of a wail, right? So you can make a lot of that by observing that comma. I know that it's easier when you're going up with a high G to not to breathe there. You don't have to breathe there, but you do have to phrase there. And you can phrase there by using a little bit more of the L consonant. They called this in the Baroque time, they called this the Italians called it a raddoppiamento sintattico, a syntactic double. We call it syntactic doubling now in opera. And so you can use it absolutely in that place to make that interruption sound stronger. And the third thing in this refrain is to recognize that we sometimes look at this music and we say, why didn't they write any dynamics? Well, they did. They just didn't write it with F's and P's and M's. They wrote it by observing the tessitura of the vocal line. And so when you're dealing with an accompaniment like a lute or a harpsichord, you have the possibility of singing really softly or of singing really loudly because they can make a huge range of dynamics. And even more than the volume, it's the density of the sound because it's a pluck and then it goes away. There's not a lot of stuff for you to work through like there is if you're singing with an orchestra or a grand piano, where the sound is just more of a blanket and a support. Here, it's much more of a sort of a partner in the texture. So you can start softly, your first two bars. Tessitura goes up, you get louder, and the tessitura goes as high as ever. You can be really loud. And so the tessitura of your melody should be a graph for your dynamics. And we're going to see some places in some of these verses where it does the opposite, or even in the refrain, forever, 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 ever let me weep. And you can absolutely be as sottovoce, as bleached, as exhausted as you want to sound. He's really painting a beautiful picture of what we do when we scream and cry and then we fall on the floor exhausted from what we just did. Does that resonate for you? That makes sense. So I think I would love to try. This from when maybe you, because she's memorized, you could show her bar 22, which is the repeat of the material, and I'd like you to try that with a faster tempo and no retards. That we don't. The retard is really a modern construct. They never in some English music at the end of a certain section they'll write the word drag, which I love. It just means to slow down, but they did not put retardandos at the end of every cadence. So it's this piece being on a ground has a sort of a relentless, never stopping tension that feeds the anxiety of this speaker, right? Even though it sags to the bottom, it picks up and it goes again, and then it sags, and then it picks up and it goes again. So we want to feel that motion, and by going a little faster, by not slowing down, we're going to feel that wonderful contribution of the bass line to the line you're singing. So I would love to hear this. Let me weep. Oh, let me. Just a little bit more forward, a little bit more heart on your sleeve, passionate. Okay. The other clue that I get from this, Maya, to tell you the truth, and everybody, is that whenever I see an imperative verb, and this is where I'm going to be a grammar and a grammar geek on you, but an imperative verb is a command verb, right? She's not, oh, may I weep. She says, let me weep, let me weep. It's a command. And we remember that in the Baroque, when our humors got out of balance, when our balance of wet and dry and hot and cold, which were the four elements that they thought balanced our emotional health, when they get out of balance for sadness, we have too much wet humor. And so weeping was a way of letting out those tears, balancing, getting our balance back. And when you get to a certain, in sort of these poetic conceits, if we can't weep, we are in big trouble. It's when we are weeping that we're actually kind of doing the right thing. So this person is a mess. She's really upset and cannot weep. And so this let me is a cry for help. And so I think you could sing it a little bit more as a cry for help and a little less as a lament. I bet you'll like it. Let's give it a try. So with that quicker tempo, maybe you could just give her one round when so she can, or even the cadence is fine. Yeah, pretty good, pretty good. You did really well with that terrace dynamics until you got to the final phrase, and then you're used to having to use a little bit of chest voice and push it out there, aren't you? So maybe we can try that again at the ending, and you can just let it die. Forever, forever, but just little, you know. Another good thing to know about this music is that not all half notes have to be equal. So when you sing, that second, you know, the F is long because it's the dissonance, and what they lived for was the dissonance. The resolution is less interesting. So you can actually just let that go. It doesn't be, oh, but, oh, oh, and just let it diminuendo and sort of vaporize at the end. That's exactly right. They didn't bother to micromanage with, you know, 3 dots and some 16th rests or something. It was just a performance practice that they wrote about, the singers knew about. Now we can take that liberty and enjoy that. It would be beautiful. I loved your opening, was terrific. How do you like this tempo? Right, I agree. I agree. And I think when the two of you, when you and the flute or the violin, whatever you're doing this with, Purcell wasn't that picky about what played the obbligato line. But when you get into this dialogue where you're singing forever, forever, you can pile up on each other a little bit more. At the moment, it seems it's a little polite. It's kind of like forever, and now you, dear, and now forever, and now you do. It's a little hesitant. I would say, if anything, you want to jump on the ends of those and keep that forward momentum going, so that when the flute gets to the part that's dum da dum dee dum dee da ba da dum ba dee da yum ba da dum ba dee, it's not tunk ka tunk ka tunk ka tunk. And you guys tended to slow down through that, which then just kind of stranded that line, and it became kind of clunky sounding, right? So I think if you let it, even though we are lowering in volume, I think we're still in dialogue and can keep it moving, and that would be terrific. Another couple of things I can point out, this tritone that you get between the G and the C sharp, let me weep, is to our modern ears no big deal, but in this time that was an extraordinary interval, and it's difficult, and it can sound difficult. So just as I described the chromatics as being kind of slippery in Rudy's piece, this can sound almost, we think they used some portamento, it's just not like the end of a big bel canto aria, but let me weep, about like that. And you can use the pronunciation of the word weep to bring that out. You know, a W is a liquid, and you can don't make it so muscular. You know, weep can be like whip, or you know, that has an H, which helps it, but let me weep, and work through that ooh part of the W for flavor and color on this. Let me see, when you have your trill, forever, ever weep, right? You trill from above because you're coming from above, and because D is dissonant to that A major chord. So that's where you have to just use your theory and make sure that you understand the chord that's underneath, because your appoggiatura is always the dissonant note, your point of departure for the trill. Sometimes that's the note you're on in Purcell. And I'll try to find an example of that. I can't remember if there's one offhand. And then you trill up from the dissonant note. So that we, as I said, they love the dissonance. The dissonance creates stress, and the trill releases the stress, is a great way to think about it. We're used to thinking about trills in Mozart and later music where the trill is the excitement. Here, it's the appoggiatura, the dissonance, that's the excitement. Okay, so you can stick on it a good long time. The rule is half to 2/3 of the length of the note. That's a long time. Ever weep. So sometimes it's just a little dig-a-ding, you know, and that's all. Good news if you don't like to trill, because then you don't have to do it so long, right? Can we do that same thing? And now we'll try again to keep things moving and even go further ahead in the forever dialogue. Sing a nice gooey "Let Me Weep" and do your trill with the appoggiatura nice and long. Okay? Okay, let's try that again, because I think you just defaulted to your old way. Let's try that one more time. And remember, you're going to sing those ornaments on the beat, Maya. There's a tendency to think of those little thirds from below as being before the beat, but they are on the beat. So it's 1, oh, 1, ho, 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 let me, not ho, 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 let me, right? It's on the beat. And then I don't care if you look at your music. It's wonderful that you memorized, but go ahead and look if you need it to help remember these things, okay? Because it's hard to break the muscle memory if you're doing it from your script in your head, okay? Let's do that one more time. Okay, let's go ahead and move on to the next section. Some of that was fantastic. Some of it you really nailed. Just see if you can remember next time. That it's hard, because I know it's hard to look at one thing and sing another thing, but those appoggiaturas from above, you just need, after you practice them a little bit, they'll become common nature to you, second nature to sing. Ever weep and not ever weep, right? Because that the C sharp is in the chord. It's not dissonant. Ever weep. So I'll let you sort of get that into your system on your own. That'll be great. Maybe even by later in the song, you have a few more tries, you'll get to do it. Several things. I loved your portamento on "Let Me Weep." That was really tasteful, really well done. Just the right amount. You'd hardly even call it portamento. Let's go on to "My Eyes No More." And now Purcell, when he starts doing this kind of rhetorical repetition, you really get a sense of acceleration. So when, I'm sorry to stop your beautiful playing of the flute part, but just to save time, I thought we'd go on. So let's go on to "My eyes no more, no more, no more." And you're really making your point. Again, you're getting dramatic now. You're rending your garments. So let me hear this bit. And we should note that in bar 53, Maya, where you say, "Shall welcome sleep," that's a cadential figure that he's never going to waste the ink on writing trill, but absolutely you have to have a trill. Absolutely mandatory. It's a funny thing because I know if it was mandatory, why didn't he write it? But remember what I said, that they thought it was insulting to the singers to write every little thing in the thing, right? So, come sleep. So you go all the way up to the A and then trill back, sing it for a minute, and then trill back down to the G. Okay, give it a try. Even if you splat, who cares? We'll try it again, okay? Perfect. Perfect. Sorry to interrupt you. I keep forgetting I can't talk and it shuts off the sound, but that's exactly it. Great. Now, looking at the next section where we get I'll hide me. I'll hide me from the sight of day. Notice how high the flute part goes. Here we have musical rhetoric, which is like the sun coming out, all this major stuff in this whole interlude. It's like everything is happy, the sun is shining, everything is beautiful outside. I'll hide me, right? So we get a wonderful painting of you. You can almost see when it gets up there high from the sight of day on the high G, like you're blocking the sun from your eyes, and then you go down and you hide, right? Something you can do in here, well, first of all, in 68, you could put a trill, from the sight of day. Actually, no, you know what, Maya? I just did the wrong thing. Look at the chord, right? If we have an F against the G in the bass, the F is the dissonant note. So here you get to do your trill upward from the tone. So you could, from the sight of day, right? So you sing the F and then you trill up. Once you've really enjoyed that dissonance with the bass line, you release the tension by a little trill going up. And sigh, sigh, and so on. Do you want to try that refrain? I mean, that little verse? So let's have some sunshine from when? Good. Why don't we stop there and we'll look at the let's move ahead to the he's gone, which I think is the most wild. Would you agree? The most wild part of this this text. And it's also the point. You've finally gotten to your point. So let's go ahead, and I think I'd love to hear you now show me real extremes. And when the composers get to the point of the height of the emotion and the most distraught of the speaker, that we will tend to see changes coming faster and faster. So before, when you've gone from low to high in repetition, in really nice orderly fashion, or from high to low, down a step, down a third or a fourth each time, that's pretty expected. You pretty much can anticipate what's happened. But now we get, we go high, then we go low, then we go high again, then we go low again in really rapid alternation. And that's another way for Purcell to create a sort of a crescendo of emotion in this piece. So it's now your moods are coming right and left like a crazy person. There's no logic to it anymore. So let's see if you can bring that out. So really exaggerate your dynamics here. Everything from breathless to screaming, okay? Fantastic. Perfect trill. Thank you very much. That's great. But I feel like you're used to slowing down here in those silences. But let's think about what those are. Are they breathless? If you were to read this as an actress, would you be saying, "And I shall never, 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 never see him more," or "never, never, never"? You see, it loses tension if you do too much breaking up. So try again, just for right where you come in. I loved your opening, but what if your second is gone, or whatever the notes are? Sorry, I'm in the wrong key now, but he's gone, he's gone, he's gone, he's lost. It's almost like you can't believe it. He's gone, he's gone, his loss deplore, he's gone, he's gone, his loss deplore. If you were to speak it, you could use all those levels back and forth. You have to really exaggerate it in the music to make it clear, but I bet you can do it.
He's gone, he's gone, he's gone, he's lost deep gone. He's gone, he's gone, he's gone, he's lost deep gone, and I shall never, 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 never see him more.
Yeah, good. That's terrific. Make a little note in your music. You're singing an E natural in bar 129, and you really want an E flat there. It's so tasty, right? It's another one of these unexpected dissonances we adore. So love that one up and sing it every time. Okay. I think if we have time, can we do the refrain one final time? So that we'll get to the end. Again, I'll point out to you and to everybody who sings that this modern idea that at the end of a song you have to do a big retard, you don't. You'll notice that here Purcell has given you a repeat of the material at the end. You get a little coda, and that's enough. You just need to be graceful at the end. Never see him more. If you just set the last two words, that's enough. You don't have to do a big writ. And it's a lot easier to keep your momentum if you observe that. So could we do just one of the "Oh Let Me Weep"? So let's say the last one you sing, which is on page 7 or bar 98, and go from there. And let's see if we can stir absolutely everything in, all the trills, all the delicious appoggiaturas, which you're singing very well. You know what? I'll stop you one more time. Can you think of what you could do to make that first O sound like more of an interruption? I feel like you're so refined as a singer, you know, that you're doing this in a really refined way, but this is a person who's kind of flailing around the room, and that interruption is not really an "oh, excuse me while I weep," but a "oh," right? It's an agonized from the gut emotional outburst. So you can use a note shape that gives us that, I bet.
That was 98. Okay.
Yeah, good, good. I think if in your next round of working on this, you would try doing an absolute pianissimo al niente, to use a modern terminology for that final line. You will find it's wonderfully dramatic. And when you're singing with harpsichord, you absolutely can be that soft and there's no trouble with balance. So we can use the full range of expressive dynamics. So really nice, Maya. Thank you. This is you sound terrific on this. I hope you'll do more Purcell. Thank you.
Hello, I am Hsuan-Wen Chen, and I'll be performing Ich Liege und Schlafe by Heinrich Schütz.
Wonderful. Well done. Well done. Again, another voice that's, just in a great place for this music. I don't know your age or training level, but this is a great kind of repertoire for you to be singing right now, I bet. You feel it too. Yeah, so good for you for taking it on. This is a good piece to look at for all kinds of rhetorical things, since we just had a nice big chat about rhetoric. One is about the structure. It's very clearly lined up by Schütz, who of course studied in Italy and brought back all that Italian, ethos of word painting and sectionalism in music to make it really evocative in the way that the Italians did. But of course, in German and with certain Germanisms in the music, which you'll learn as you go along. But it's basically, whether I'm asleep or whether I'm awake, the Lord sustains me, right? So first we paint that picture. And then we explain what we're not afraid of. We're not afraid of the legion people marching against you, because when you call upon the Lord, auf Herr und hilf mir, mein Gott, etc. And we often get those cries. I cried out to the Lord, and He answered me in the Psalms. So this is right. You're familiar with that. And then the conclusion is, bei dem Herrn findet man Hilfe, immer, right? So we get this very nice blessing on the end. So it goes through a description of your state, then a depiction of battle, and then a plea for God's help, and then a blessing. So let's see what we can do to make those 4 sections sound more like what they are. You know what they are, and the music will give you some help if we exploit it a little bit more. If you can, think, again, in this piece, I think the slowness is on the basis of bigger notes than you realize. And a clue for this is that you look at the key signature and it's cut time. So already he's thinking in half notes at least. So it's not schla-ha-ha-ha-haf, but schlaf, right? That's schla-da-dee-dum-dum in half notes. Ich liege und schlafe und erwache, right? So a little bit more in a compact proportion. It'll still paint, I lay me down to sleep. I pray the Lord my soul to keep. It's like the children's prayer, right? And then we get und erwache comes, this should feel to us like waking up to a brand new day, loads of energy. Or if you want to think of it more negatively, it's like a huge noise happened outside and you sat bolt upright in bed, but you don't get up and stretch slowly. What Schütz has written is bum bum ba-dum, bum bum ba-dum, like trumpets, right? So the clue from the music is that it's vigorous. If it said und erwache mich auch die, then we'd have a different rhetoric being suggested to us. So you can exaggerate this by really taking off, and then why und erwache? Denn der Herr hält mich, right? So let's just do that opening once, all the way to bar 14, just the first 2 times, and see if you can give me that feeling a bit more. Great. The tempo you just arrived at, the proportion, hält mich, ich liege und schlafe. And if you don't have to breathe there, boy, would that be cool. And you know what will help you? Is you don't have to be so darned loud when you go to sleep, right? You go schlafe, yes, I'm asleep. But if we had schlafe, und erwache, and really took off, that would be very cool. Now, the other thing I hear happening is all the shaping in the verb liege is happening from the harpsichord. And Wen is doing a great job of making a messa di voce on that long note, which is the singer's job, in fact. So that should be your stretchy note. That should be your yawn. Ich liege und schlafe. Right? So you really paint that picture of laying down. And maybe this time, Wen, don't give him that shape. Make him make it. Okay? You play something plain. If you were playing organ, you wouldn't be able to do that big roll that you were creating the time with. So up to you this time, Chisum, okay?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I'm gonna stop you. I'm gonna stop you because it's not ich liege und schlafe, right? Ich liege und schlafe.
Okay, I can.
What's the more important word to Schutz? What does he decorate more in this first phrase? Schlafe, right?
I think Schlafe, yeah.
Yeah, so let's not, I feel like all the excitement's getting spent on the first two bars. Think about what you did. Denn der Herr hält mich, ich liege und schlaf. Okay? And here you go. Okay. I'm going to get you to do it even just once and then I'll be happy, which is do not breathe between liga und. Okay. And go and fall asleep. We say fall asleep because we fall asleep. We don't resist. Right? Yeah. You're going schla. I'm exaggerating, of course, but this time let's feel you slip away into sleep. Okay. No breath, no breath. Right from bar 15. Good. Okay. And that's where we have our first rhetorical division. Good. I think you'll find that if you keep going in that direction, you're going to paint us a much clearer picture of what this person is doing. I could still use more messa di voce, the hairpin dynamic over those long notes because that's what gives them this wonderful life. And if you're using a little bit of non-vibrato, you can use vibrato to help shape the note. So you start it with very little vibrato, you warm your vibrato into the middle, and then you taper going out, right? So you can do that next time. We'll go on for now. Your second, denn der Herr hält mich, is then finishing the opening section. So that, if there was any place you were going to take a little retard or a little, I like to use the word broadening rather than retard because it just means it's more settled. Denn der Herr hält mich. And there I always depend on my accompanist because I'm holding a long note. She, however, has a 4/3 suspension, right? Hält yada di underneath you. So how she places that is really controlling the tempo, although the proportion of the note. Although if you do a messa di voce and shape it just so, she'll know just where to put that. So let's try that once for the two of you. We're going to get just a little bit of settling so that we finish that way we finish one idea, we take a breath and we go on with the next and we hear the sectionalism. Okay, so this time when you can sort of place that 4/3 a little bit for him and he will do a messa di voce to support it. Right from bar 25, right? Yeah.
The final one?
Yes, please. Good. Good. That's super. That's really good. Now when we go on, there's no real change of tempo indicated from Schutz. So I think what he's trying to do now is one of the things he does in a lot of these pieces from the Kleine Geistliche Concerto, which is that he creates these sound effects that sort of make the, do you remember in the German piece, the Rosenmüller, that when played during the break, did you get to hear that?
No, I didn't.
Oh, okay. Well, when you listen to the lecture, if you go back and you listen to that, they will use words that sound noisy to create the sound of all these feet on the battlefield. All right. So, ich fürchte mich nicht. all of that ich laut, right? So that you get all that noise. And so we want to make sure that we use that with all this repetition. And we also have to use the sort of chaos that occurs when you have hunderttausenden, right? And the accented syllable is not in the place we expect, and then an unaccented syllable is in a place we don't expect. And we tend to sing hunderttausenden and hunderttausenden, but it's ich fürchte mich nicht für die hunderttausenden, für die hunderttausenden. Yeah, and you can still do that. Don't let the bar line, we call this is the tyranny of the bar line. The bar line is imposing something on you that it should not. It should simply organize these notes so you don't have to worry about your phrasing, you know, but not about word accent. So the faster you can do this, if we had, help me. Ich fürchte mich nicht für hunderttausenden, für hunderttausenden. And you're going to have to mutter this a lot to get it in your mouth that fast. But it would sound really cool because then it would sound like millions of foot soldiers coming at you. Yeah? You can start right on it if you like. That's fine. You can do the cadence if you like. I don't care.
Yeah, I thought that was Ich fürchte mich nicht für die Hunderttausenden, für die Hunderttausenden, die sich mir wieder nicht sprechen. Ich fürchte mich nicht für die Hunderttausenden, ich fürchte mich nicht für die Hunderttausenden, für die Hunderttausenden, die sich mir wieder nicht, die sich mir wieder nicht sprechen.
Great. And then we have another one of those points, and you actually both did very well. You ended that in a poised way. That was super, especially the first couple, and it takes real discipline to find a way to stretch in a group of eighth notes. Für hunderttausenden, für hunderttausenden, and young da. But you could stretch within the big beats. Those little eighth notes can be a little bit flexible according to what syllable they're on. So if you need one to be longer, tausenden, number one, it's the stressed syllable. Number two, it's a diphthong, right? It needs a lot more time than zenden, which are totally unimportant. Für hunderttausenden, right? Tausenden, it just swallows away. And in your singing, you can do that with this kind of accompaniment. Totally possible, okay? Now, the last thing I'd like to offer you, and I've never tried to really do this on Zoom, but those little notes, I think I talked to one of the people who sang about, or maybe it was in the Ferrari, to do that sort of glottal style of articulation that they loved. It's called a battuta di gorgia, or the way of singing passaggi. It's how you sing a trillo, and it's a little articulation in the throat, very, very light, absolutely will not hurt you. I have sung for 45 years, and I have never hurt myself doing this. Living proof among many of my colleagues. So the way you do it is, it's like a little laugh. It's like you're going, ha, 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 and it's very light, very light. It's almost like a rhythmic ornament rather than a fully phonated sound. But if you use that articulation on this, it makes it super nimble. Where if you try to take your whole voice through those, you'll end up having to slow down, but that's not the effect he's going for, right? He's looking for something that's, these people are all around you throwing stuff at you, bombs and rocks and arrows, and it's meant to be sharp and not nice at all. Do you want to try it once and just experiment in front of all your fans here, doing a little bit of, okay, it's like just remember to do it very, very light, like a laugh. Right? So maybe start at yeah, good. You did it. That's exactly the way. That's super. And you're going to use that again when they smash their teeth, right? On the word zählen. And it's going to make that whole thing be so much easier. Good for you. All right. So this rhetorical pause is not as big as some of the others. We're now going on to the next idea, which is Aufhör und hilf mir, right?
Yeah.
Remember your good half note proportion here. We're not going to get super slow, right?
Okay. So yeah, we will come in. So. Aufhör und hilf mir meine Gott, denn du schlägst alle meinen Feinden auf den Magen und zerschmetterst der gottlosen Zähne und zerschmetterst der gottlosen Zähne.
Yeah, good. Much lighter, much easier to sing, and we really get all the articulation, which is really kind of nasty.
It has to be lighter.
Yeah, exactly. That's the trick to it. It's when people try to do the glottal articulation with heavy vocal production that it just sounds like the bleating of a goat, or it just sounds heavy and dangerous, but it's not. It's just a very nice light production. I would love to hear a couple of things, and Schütz doesn't make this easy, but you can do it, I know, is to lighten the second syllables of some of the two-syllable words, like buffen, right?
Okay.
Backen, sorry, I said the wrong word.
Yeah.
Yeah, backen. So, alle meine Feinde auf den Backen. So loud on ba and soft on ken, right? Same thing with Gottlosen, not losen, but light. Gottlosen Zähne, right? So you crescendo into the long B flat of Zähne once you get done with all the teeth gnashing, and you do a nice messa di voce on that long B flat, and then the N is not so important. It just goes away. Could we try this from Aufhör und hilf mir? So it's Aufhör und hilf mir. A second command. Again, we have imperative words. Auf, hilf mir, right? There's no bitte in here.
Aufhör und hilf mir mein Gott, denn du schlägst alle meine Feinden auf den Magen und zerschmetterst der gebrochenen Zähne und zerschmetterst der gottlosen Zähne.
Yeah, terrific. I like your ornament very much there. The reason it's not working so well with your accompanist is that you are kind of slamming into it. You know how when you see taillights up ahead, you're driving, if you wait too long to slow down, you have to hit a wall, but if say so you set that C a little bit, just a little bit poised.
The extra element so it actually runs together. Yeah. Well, I'm saying the extra elements added towards the C is actually, I probably think that's what make it the both of us not coming to like that downbeat. So I can try to take it out and see what it does sound like.
Yeah, I think you can control the time with both the placement of the main note and the way you do the ornament. It doesn't need a huge retard, but again, this is a big rhetorical section because we're about to give the final conclusion, which is bei dem Herren, and dem Herren, right? Not dem Herren, dem Herren findet man Hilfe. So you can set that, and then we have a reason to take the big breath. Do you want to go from unzerschmettert, just the last 4 bars?
The second one?
Yes.
Yeah. Zerschmetterst der großen Zähne. Bei dem Herren findet man Hilfe, findet man Hilfe, findet man Hilfe. Und deinen Segen über ein Volk sehen.
Yeah, super, super. I see you decided not to do the ornament, but it was perfectly fine because you did a good shape. So that's fine too. I feel that the the gap in between findet man Hilfe und deine Segen is awkward because there's no real break in the sentence is kind of, and with the Lord, bei dem Herrn findet man Hilfe und deinen Segen über dein Volk. So it kind of, or Volk, sorry, the dots aren't here. So I think you could make that go along. This is a case where I would be very curious whether that was originally meant to be a tied note, and we can't really tell unless we look at the original print and find out. Because sometimes they would put a dot, and sometimes they would put, if it was a line break, they'd have to put a new note. But I would be inclined to try it once without restriking the downbeat. What do you think, Wen? Is that worth trying? It means no slowing down. So, findet man Hilfe und deinen Segen. You know, so it just kind of goes on. Or a light restrike, perhaps a light restrike, and not like we're starting all over again. You want to try it and see see if you like it? This could be a bad idea, mind you. I just want to see what it sounds like.
Findet man Hilfe.
Oh, let's try it once, not slowing down on findet man Hilfe, but going on to the next section without without stopping and starting again. So, findet man Hilfe und deinen Segen. So we just keep the pulse going. And if you play a chord, I don't really care if you play one or not, but it's definitely not a big deal. We're not starting a new idea. We're in the middle of a sentence. That's all I'm saying. Okay? I would love to do this whole Bei dem Herren again, if you don't mind. I think this is a case of we're getting a lullaby. Bei dem Herren, bei dem Herrn, it's incredibly optimistic, happy, safe, and you could put more lilt into it, I think, and that would be lovely. Remember that the last syllable of Herre is not important. Herren, Hilfe, findet, no heaviness there. So this is very liquidy and beautifully, you know, sort of warming lullaby triple. Okay, let's do the whole triple. Okay, I'm going to stop you because you're back in three, guys. You're back in three. You have bei dem Herren findet man Hilfe, and it's findet man Hilfe, findet man Hilfe, right? 2 words per bar, not 3. Let's try it again. Great. And now I'll stop you again just to give you an idea because we can't go forever, but that was excellent. And now is where you can take some time. Now is where we have these crazy zelas. Yum ba-da-dum 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 ba-da-dee. Und deinen, we're going to repeat. So we said it. Da, dee. Yum ba-da-dum 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 ba-da-da da da dee da. Tium ba-da-dum ba-da-da. You see, so you at the end of every phrase when it goes into longer note values, be poised, do what I call a soft landing. You know how that feels in an airplane? And you know how it is when they go, da-da, yum ba-da-dum ba-da-da, and it's not so soft. So see if you can create that soft landing feeling in this section. How about going right from und deinen Segen, right at 73? Yeah, that's a very, very nice feeling, and it's you really have to finesse it, and you're doing well. I think you can probably take it a little bit further when you've got time for such things, but really, really well done. Thank you very much. That was super enjoyable. Well done.
Okay, thank you all. So now I'll take questions, but then I'm going to be back to here. You might not be seeing me. Thank you, Alan, so much. This is so wonderful. Do you want to have any questions? You must be very clear. There's no questions.
Oh my gosh. Well, either that or I've stunned everyone into silence. But thank you so much, Wen. This was really, really a pleasure. And I'll encourage the participants, if they have questions that come to them later, that they can send them to you and send them to me, and I'll try to answer via email. But maybe if we just even take a deep breath now, see if, oh, I see, or there's a thank you in the chat. Thank you. My pleasure. Really wonderful to hear three very, very talented singers and with terrific repertoire for working on this idea.
Yes,
Great.
and and some of them they just only got the music and learned it from the beginning of semester. So I'm very, very proud of them.
Yeah, it's not easy stuff to learn. This is really terrific.
Yeah.
Yeah, good. Do we have undergrads or grad students? Who did I hear?
The Rudy is the artist diploma student, and Maya and CJ they are undergrad students.
Okay. Wow, wow, wow. Well, going big places, I think. Really good. Really good. Good.
Well, thank you all. And if you have any questions, I put my email in the chat, and you can email me. And when
Great.
the video is available, and then I'll send the email to you. So thank you, Alan.
Thank you, Wen. Thank you, everyone, and everyone who sang. Hi, Jimmy. Hi,
Thank
all.
you, everybody.
Yeah, good to see a lot of my peeps here. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Bye bye.